Okay, cool. Hello, everyone. This is Empowering Democracy. It's also another Dump the Corruption show. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And my topic for tonight, is another progressive loss. And this refers to the outcome of an election took place in Rhode Island very recently, and a progressive candidate who was expected to win, and who, with 2 weeks to go, supposedly had a substantial lead, got beat. So I want to begin to go over some of the facts that are apparent, at this time, and I'm going to do this through an article which appeared in the American Prospect. And here's the article. The headline is "Upset House Loss is a Major Progressive Disappointment in Rhode Island." The tagline is Aaron Regenberg, the frontrunner, as recently as 2 weeks ago, lost to Biden administration official Gabe Amo. Amo. What went wrong? The article is by Luke Goldstein. It's published September 5th, 2023. There's a picture of a scene, in Rhode Island, where Gabe Amo, a Democrat running in the special primary in Rhode Island's 1st congressional district, greets voters Cynthia and Mark Butler in Barrington, Rhode Island, July 31st, 2023. Former Biden White House official Gabe Amo pulled off an upset victory in Rhode Island's 1st congressional district, a Democratic primary, to replace outgoing Representative David Cicilline, who was a Democrat, of course, and had been a Rhode Island congressman for some time. In Cicilline's case, he was a very progressive Democrat. He wasn't a squad member, but he was about, as progressive, as Democrats get, who were not squad members. He was a supporter, of Medicare for All. He was a supporter of eliminating student debt. He was a supporter of the child tax credit. So Cicilline was a loss to the progressive bloc when he decided to retire. Now, the winner of the race, Gabe Amo, who had never run for political office before, and will face Republican Gary Leonard, a Marine veteran, in the general election for the reliably blue seat is, of course, a Biden Democrat. Which means he's not a progressive. He's a centrist. He's likely to follow wherever Biden goes. This is definitely a defeat, for the progressive bloc, in Congress and for progressives as a whole. In a crowded field of candidates, Amo beat the leading progressive in the race, former state representative Aaron Regenberg, as well as established political figures in the state, such as Lieutenant Governor Sabina Matos, and Representative Sandra Cano. He will likely become the first black person to represent Rhode Island in Congress. The fact that he's a black person does not mean that he's going to vote in such a way as to benefit the community of blacks in the United States. As I said, he will probably follow Biden's lead wherever Biden goes, and whether or not that's of benefit to black people. The fact that he's black has purely symbolic significance. It doesn't appear to have any substantive significance at all. Anyway, Regenberg was the front runner in Amo's own internal polling as recently as the middle of August, and he received high-profile endorsements from New England and national figures. So how did he squander the lead? What does it mean for a degraded progressive campaign infrastructure that now looks shaky in winnable races? And Goldstein goes on. Yeah, it's an interesting question. What does it mean? Actually, I just interrupted. I agree. What does it mean? It looked like an easy, progressive sort of pickup here. In Regensburg's case, he was not running as someone who would join the squad. He was running as a successor to Cicilline. And so we've lost someone, or the progressives have lost someone who would be at least as progressive, as Cicilline. So going on with Luke Goldstein's article, in some ways, Regenberg was a victim of his own success. Other candidates lit into him in the race's final weeks with a barrage of attacks, just as they did to take down the previous front runner, specifically Matos, after she submitted forged signatures to qualify for the ballot. The attacks were less about policy priorities than a campaign finance issue involving Regenberg's family members. Regenberg received support from a super PAC, Progress Rhode Island, bearing a $5,000 contribution from his mother and $125,000 from his father-in-law, who I guess were both working through the super PAC. His father-in-law is an executive at a global investment firm. The funds for mailers and for digital ads were relatively paltry, but since Regenberg pledged to not take money from corporate PACs, it opened him up to criticism, even though other candidates had far more assistance from corporate PACs. In other words, if you're going to promise to do something, at the beginning of your campaign, then you had better do that, okay, if you want to win. Whatever benefits the super PAC might have been able to deliver Regenberg, it also compromised his anti-corporate image. Uh, okay, going on with Matos, who was endorsed by the New Democrat the coalition, essentially a centrist group, received over 800,000 in super PAC funding affiliated with Emily's List. The Bold PAC, an arm of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and elect Democratic women, according to campaign finance reports. Yet she finished a distant fourth. So money mattered less in this campaign than being defined by scandal, okay, says Luke Goldstein. Late in the race, Regenberg's backers tried to target Amo's corporate ties. There was a memo released by the Working Families Party supporters, okay, of Regenberg. The Working Families Party, but was Regenberg's main backer, revealed that Amo had received $21,126 in the corporate lobbyist money over the course of the campaign. The donations came from lobbyists representing the tobacco industry, financial behemoths such as Blackstone, pharma firms, and big tech, Amazon and Google. Amo himself also worked as a registered lobbyist for Home Depot, which has consistently contributed to Republicans over the years. So, Working Families Party revealed that Gabe Amo was clearly a corporate shill. This was not necessarily true with respect to Regenberg, because even though he received a lot of money from a super PAC, obviously the super PAC money was money from his own family, $5,000 from his mother and $125,000 from his father-in-law. So the family element in there was strong. It would not have necessarily compromised, okay, or defined Regenberg, okay, as a corporate shill. It was much more likely, okay, that Amo was a corporate shill. But I guess people didn't look at it from that particular perspective. They looked at it as Regenberg breaking a promise. After the memo was released, Gabe Amo responded to the Working Families Party by going on the offensive in ways that reveal the self-inflicted wound of Regenberg's super PAC. Quote, "I refuse to be lectured by the Working Families Party," unquote, said Amo to the Boston Globe. Quote again, "My father works behind the counter at his own liquor store and my mother is recovering from her second knee replacement surgery, having spent her career as an SEIU nurse, while the WFP's endorsed candidate super PAC gets check of $5,000, $125,000 respectively from his mother, okay, and his father-in-law. Now, from my point of view, of course, okay, I don't think that buying an election, okay, with family money um, 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 is kosher. But I also think, okay, on the other hand, that Amo, for God's sakes, for his whole career has been a corporate shill, while Regenberg, in spite of his family money, has had a very progressive record. So, if I look at this from a dump the corruption point of view, I would say the lesser of the two evils here, okay, is Regenberg. I don't know whether there was a Green Party candidate, okay, in this particular race. Okay, I don't know whether there was a candidate who was taking very little corporate money, but clearly the so-called corporate money that was going in for Regenberg was more family money than it was corporate money. Okay, and the whole point, okay, of not taking big money is that you should not be taking it. You should not be taking money from corporations. You should not be taking money from party committees and PACs. Okay, but certainly, while both parties, both Amo, okay, and Regenberg, were guilty, okay, of taking the big money. Okay, it's quite clear that if you're going into an election where you have to choose between the two, and you don't have, okay, a choice of someone who isn't taking big money, okay, it seems like the better choice should be the person who's taking the least amount, okay, of big money. Not suggesting here that that was Regenberg. It might have been one of the other candidates. But it appears that Matos was backed by far more money than Regenberg was. And it might also have been the case, I'm not quite clear on these facts right now, quite yet. I tried to look it up in Open Secrets yesterday, but they didn't have the facts on the race yet. And so okay, I could not tell whether Regenberg was outgunned, okay, by Amo financially, but I suspect that he was, and that Amo had much more establishment money than Regenberg. So it seems to me that Regenberg should still have won, okay, this race. Despite low name recognition in the district, Amo's service in the Biden White House as Deputy Director of the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, where he mainly oversaw coordination between state and local governments for disaster preparedness and COVID-19, enabled him to win high-profile endorsements like former Chief of Staff Ron Klain and connect to the Democratic mainstream. So he had an endorsement from Ron Klain. So why should that have any weight? It shouldn't have any weight except for centrists. While emphasizing his government experience, Amo focused his campaign on standard Democratic issues, such as protecting Social Security and Medicare and instituting gun safety measures. Gabe Amo ran a solid campaign, but it's striking that for all the doom and gloom about President Biden's approval ratings, a relatively unknown candidate can win a House seat in large part on his Biden resume. I think that is surprising. It is surprising. Certainly surprised me. Gabe Amo also had a powerful attack dog, Patrick Kennedy, the former representative of the district until 2011, endorsed Amo with a lyrical campaign ad that played heavily on Camelot, nostalgia, with cameos from John, Robert, and Teddy Kennedy. But in the final days before the election, Kennedy went on a tirade against Regenberg, painting him as too extreme for the district. So, in other words, the fact that the Regenberg campaign was using a super PAC evidently meant more to the electorate than the fact that Regenberg obviously wasn't acting as a corporate shill during his career. Kennedy, in particular, took issue with the progressive hopeful's promise to cut defense spending, which he claimed would hurt defense industry jobs in the state. That was probably true. Quote, the notion that he would come out against the largest economic driver, the defense economy, left me flabbergasted. The notion that you can be a good Democrat and liberal and not also support a strong national defense and good jobs here at home makes no sense, unquote, Kennedy said at a press conference. In response, the Regenberg campaign shot back, quote, the campaign's more than comfortable with the closing arguments centering around the urgent need for Medicare for all and tackling the greed of the military-industrial complex, said a source close to the Regenberg campaign. Now, I think that was a tactical error. It seems to me what Regenberg should have been doing, in shooting back, was to point out that the Biden administration has put us all under risk of nuclear war for the first time since the 1980s, and that the Biden foreign policy has been totally irresponsible, and that the support of Regenberg for cutting the military industrial complex's funds is extremely important because it indicates that Regenberg would not be in favor of continued war, in Ukraine. Instead, he would want to make such a war impossible for the U.S. to pursue. In other words, he should have touted himself, as a peace candidate rather than talking about the greed of the military-industrial complex. Anyway, in the end, the stamp of approval from the Kennedy legacy won out over Regenberg's progressive bona fides. While Regenberg sported national endorsements, and by the way, these are really critical, from Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont, the Congressional Progressive Caucus. In other words, they didn't abandon Regenberg the way they had abandoned the challenge of Nina Turner in Ohio. In spite of those national endorsements, he did not benefit from some of the progressive campaign infrastructure that was successful in 2000 and 2020 House races. Justice Democrats, which helped power several progressives to victory, has struggled with financing and undergone several rounds of layoffs. in recent months. So maybe we ought to ask why the Justice Democrats have been struggling. Maybe that's why Reaganburg lost. The Justice Democrats have been struggling, and maybe they weren't able to power him to victory because the public has begun to perceive since 2018 that when progressives come to Congress, they do not actually deliver on their promises. Maybe the caving in on various issues, of AOC and some, of the other people who are really, really lefty progressives, and maybe the performance of the Congressional Progressive Caucus on caving in again and again and again on promises and major issues, just being doormats for Joe Biden. Maybe that has made voters reconsider whether it's useful at all to vote for the progressives, whether there's a real difference in voting for a progressive candidate as opposed to voting for an establishment candidate. Since when the progressives get into office, they act like establishment candidates anyway. Maybe that's the narrative that is starting to get into people's minds. In 2018, when the Democrats scored an upset victory in the House, a lot of their steam during that campaign was generated by their support for Medicare for All. But how has the Congressional Progressive Caucus behaved since that time? It has generated some good Medicare for All bills. The latest one, is the best of all. But it hasn't pushed those bills. It hasn't gone to the mat for those bills. A victory that was generated for the Democrats in 2018, in part based on the promises that these new progressive Democrats were going to kick butt when they got into office, and we're going to deliver on their promises made in support, for Medicare for All. Perhaps they didn't fight hard enough to convince their constituents that they deserved the seats, they received. Yes, I know in the congressional districts that they won in 2018, and 2020, as incumbents, most of the progressive Democrats who were elected in 2018 and 2020 still won in 2022. But one of them lost, and many of the progressive primary candidates lost. And as is admitted in this article, the Justice Democrats have struggled, with financing. Maybe they've struggled with financing because their candidates, are no longer credible, and because people who are leftist activists see that the Justice Democratic candidates are not candidates who can be counted upon to support the priorities, of the progressive voters. Maybe it's that failure of performance which was a factor during the Rhode Island campaign. Maybe people didn't really believe what Regenberg had to say about what he was going to do when he got into Congress. And maybe while they didn't particularly care for Gabe Amo, because he was obviously an established Democrat, and just a Biden Democrat, maybe people didn't want to be disappointed again, didn't want to be taken in again. Regenberg's defeat may have been more of a function of the lack of performance by progressives who had previously been elected across the country, but who had failed to deliver in 2019 and 2020, and who had failed to deliver in 2021 and 2022. Even after a victory of a couple of the lefty progressives in the election of 2022, what did the progressive Democrats do following the victories in 2022? Well, I'll tell you what they did. They immediately caved to Nancy Pelosi again in relation to her choice for her successor. She obviously supported Hakeem Jeffries, who in many ways, from a policy point of view, looks like a carbon copy of Nancy Pelosi. Looks like a person who's bought by the healthcare and the pharmaceutical industries, and who will do nothing to push Medicare for all. The new leadership team, the Democrats, none of them looks like they're going to push Medicare for all. None of them looks like they're going to push a Green New Deal. None of them looks like they're going to push a child tax credit. And none of them looks like they're going to go to the mat for Roe v. Wade in the future. In short, the new leadership team looks like same old, same old. It doesn't look like the progressive Democrats who had been elected fought for anything. So why elect a non-establishment Democrat such as Regenberg? In the face of that, why should the voters have gone to the mat for Regenberg? Why should they have gotten involved when all the progressives who have been elected to make a fuss, to stand strong, have caved to the establishment Democrats right along? Going on with the article. Progressive campaigns hit a speed bump last cycle with a flood of money from pro-Israel groups like AIPAC in winnable primaries, mostly attacking progressive candidates. Campaigns have become so paranoid about this, they have focused heavily on bulletproofing themselves from this onslaught. Regenberg, whose uncle is Representative Brad Schneider, who's a Democrat from Illinois, a major pro-Israel Democrat, worked hard to keep AIPAC funding out of the race. Only the Working Families Party supported Regenberg, however, not other campaign groups. So Regenberg was underfunded in this campaign, which is probably why he took the super PAC money. So again, Only the Working Families Party supported Regenberg, however, not other campaign groups, despite it being the only contested House primary of the year. Regenberg received final endorsements in the last days of the campaign from squad member Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat of New York, and also Representative Rosa DeLauro, Democrat of Connecticut, a long-time progressive in New England and close ally, of Cicilline's. And by the way, the major pusher and supporter for the child tax credit. When the Biden administration first passed that, it was very popular. But of course, the Biden administration allowed it to expire. That, by the way, was before the Republicans took control of the House. So it was possible to make that permanent. But Biden did not push for that. And Rosa DeLauro did not continue to push for that. Anyway, Rosa was a long-time progressive in New England, close ally of Cicilline's. Though Cicilline did not endorse, he named, in an exit interview, both DeLauro and Representative Jamie Raskin, who also supported Regenberg. So here's another thing. Why did not Cicilline endorse? What's wrong with him, that he did not endorse? Is he retiring, or does he intend to run for the Senate? Why would he worry about whether he had the support of Joe Biden or not? I mean, evidently, Gabe Amo had the support of Biden. That's pretty clear, even though he didn't have the explicit support. Anyway, in an exit interview, he named DeLauro and Representative Jamie Raskin, who was also a supporter of Regenberg, as his two favorite members of Congress, all but putting a stamp, on Regenberg as a desired successor. But again, he did not give him the stamp. Why not? What's the problem? Regenberg was also endorsed by the Congressional Progressive Caucus, as was said above, of which Cicilline is a member and a former vice chair. Senator Sanders even visited the district in late August to hold a rally alongside Regenberg and about 600 supporters, seeking to put an exclamation point on the frontrunner's candidacy. The enthusiasm seemed to offer a glimmer of hope to Regenberg's supporters that the candidate could prevail. Well, that might have been, an enthusiastic meeting. 600 supporters seems like a fair amount in such a small state. But what has Bernie Sanders been doing since the Biden administration started? What has he been doing? The answer is he's been caving to Joe Biden at every turn, on every issue. And he's been leading all the other progressives, both in the Senate and the House, to cave to Joe Biden on key issues. Joe Manchin puts his foot down continuously to protect the interests of the conservative Dems and the interests of their donors. But the progressives, whose donors are the voters, who favor progressives, they don't get their representatives putting their foot down in Congress to fight for their priorities. That's a large contrast in terms of what happens on the left as opposed to what happens on the right. Now, maybe it's because the progressive financial supporters are mostly small dollar donations that somehow the progressive candidates don't think they have to put their feet down in order to defend their donors. Uh, but you have to ask why the attitudes are that way. The enthusiasm seemed to offer a glimmer of hope to Regenberg's supporters that the candidate could prevail. But again, maybe the reason why there was no hope was because what Bernie Sanders has to say, perhaps, doesn't count for much anymore because Bernie Sanders has caved on so many of the key issues. Now, I know he comes back, he goes through the motions. He introduced a very good Medicare for All bill, okay, in the Senate just recently. He still comes out for Medicare for All. He comes out on, on various other issues. But by and large, he is supporting Joe Biden. He never gets into fights with Joe Biden. He studiously avoids getting into fights with Joe Biden on foreign policy, even though Joe Biden's administration and its foreign policy has put us all at risk. Where is Bernie when it comes to fighting on these issues? The answer is he is not there. And when it comes to defending the Medicare for All issue, he is also not really there. He's going through the motions. That's all we see from Bernie right now. But the event also highlighted an intra-left skirmish that had dogged the campaign since the beginning. The local chapter of the DSA in Providence objected to Sanders' quote compromise endorsement and stumping for a quote wealthy super PAC candidate, okay, unquote. So there was a choice here between a wealthy candidate using his own money and an obvious corporate shill who was using corporate money. And so the DSA decides that it's better to object to Sanders' compromise endorsement. And what kind of sense does that make? Did they have a better candidate that Bernie should have supported? Not really. The local DSA issued an anti-endorsement of Regenberg, along with another local left-wing group, largely for his support for state party leadership while he sat in the legislature. They did not endorse an alternative candidate. Okay, instead. So they probably thought that Regenberg, since he followed state party leadership, would be likely to endorse congressional party leadership. It's probably true. He probably would be a supporter of congressional party leadership. But that, of course, underlines my point, which is the small dollar donors and also the progressive types of voters, at least in some places, and perhaps in Rhode Island, have gotten fed up with candidates who say they're progressive, but who will fight for nothing, who will stand up for nothing, who will stand up to the establishment, both at the federal level, and at the state level. It remains an open question what bearing the feud had on the race, though it forced the Reagan-backed campaign to put resources into consolidating the progressive vote over other contenders. State Representative Sandra Cano also ran in the progressive lane with endorsement support mainly from the state teachers union due to her consistent support for school funding. And why did Reaganburg not have a similar record when it came to supporting school funding? We have to ask that question too. Maybe one of the factors, in his losing this election was that he was not sufficiently progressive to actually distinguish himself from Amo. Now, those left groups will have to bring Amo around to their priorities when he didn't need their support at all to win the primary. The fractured left and the inability to convert on a winnable race, meanwhile, should alarm national progressive groups as they limp into the next election cycle. Of course, we don't need to have the progressives limp into 2024. We need to have them jump into 2024 with a hammer, with a progressive hammer. But they can't develop such a hammer if they can't agree on candidates who are likely to fight for the priorities of the progressive groups. So that's where things stand. Obviously, my main point in discussing this article is to suggest that the failure of the progressives in what should have been a winnable race, in the Rhode Island area, is probably mostly due to the failure of the progressives, including the Congressional Progressive Caucus, to get anything decent done at the national level, because they're always caving in to Joe Biden. So faith in them is gone. When Biden comes into a congressional race and supports a particular candidate, and there are progressives who have divided themselves into three lanes who are running against the only establishment candidate, of course, it's difficult for them to win against the establishment candidate, especially when the establishment candidate tries to take advantage of wealthy family donors to get him into office. It's only natural that people should question that when there are holes in your progressive credentials from the beginning, and you promise to do something, and you do not do that thing. It's no wonder why people lose heart and why the conservative Democrat comes out. The conservative Democrat with more campaign money comes out on top. I have to ask, where was Reaganburg's ground game? What kind of ground game did he have? Did he have a ground game at all? Did he have people going from door to door? Did he have any deep support? I have to ask that. That question is not answered, by this article. I don't know the answer to the question, but I suspect that his resort to the super PAC was because he didn't have much of a ground game. He needed money to compete using campaign ads because, in spite of the fact that he was a progressive, he was running a conventional campaign. So that's what I have to say about that particular campaign. But I want to issue a general warning to progressives as we go into 2024. I think the progressives in Congress, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, as a body, and the squad progressives both, have to really start to be nasty and have to really begin to fight. I think the first thing they need to do is to get rid of Jayapal, because she is not a fighter. Now, I don't know who among the CPC is most likely to fight for the major priorities, of the progressive. I can't say for sure who that would be. I don't know whether Rashida Tlaib would fight more, or whether AOC would fight more, or whether Presley or Cori Bush would fight more. I suspect the person who would fight more is actually a sleeper, specifically Debbie Dingell. I think she has Medicare for All in her DNA, in her family DNA. And she would fight for it. And I think she would fight for a Green New Deal too. She strikes me as the primary real fighter that the progressives has left in the House, and that they should elect her as the chair, of the CPC. And that when it comes time in 2025, hopefully to elect, a new Speaker of the House, that when Hakeem Jeffries runs, the whole CPC as a block says no. He is absolutely unacceptable. We need a leader who's going to be a Medicare for All supporter. We're not going to support any other Democrat as Speaker of the House. With the exception of Debbie Dingell. So, moving on, there's another article I do want to say something about. Looks like my time's almost up. I'll keep this short. Of course, most of you should know, if you've been paying attention, that there is a Republican shutdown threat raising the risk of inhumane cuts to food aid. Much more, all kinds of cuts. There's a quote from Rosa DeLauro here. House Republicans are listening to their most extreme members on steps that could slow the flow of relief and put us to the brink of a government shutdown, unquote. That was a warning that Rosa DeLauro gave to the leaders. Also, by the way, I think Rosa DeLauro, is another fighter. I just don't think she would fight as hard for Medicare for all, as Debbie Dingell would. Anyway, Republican threats to shut down the federal government if spending isn't drastically cut have put funding for a critical nutrition aid program at risk as hunger grows across the nation. The Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, commonly known as WIC, W-I-C, is one of the many federal programs that could face severe impacts if Congress fails to fund the government by September 30th. Only 22 days until September 30th, folks. And there's a scramble. There's far less number of business days. And the House and the Senate have to pass 12 different bills to get the budget deal that was made earlier funded. As the Washington Post's Tony Rahm reported Sunday, while USDA technically can operate WIC if federal funding lapses, states can only continue benefits for as long as they had leftover money. A shutdown at the end of 2018 into the following January, for example, brought some states within a month of having to cut WIC benefits, institute wait lists, or take other drastic action. Rahm noted, citing a Washington state nutrition official, quote, nearly a decade later, state leaders and nutrition experts fear the fight in the nation's capital once again could leave millions of women and children in a financial bind. It's funny how these fights between Republicans and Democrats always leave the most vulnerable, even more vulnerable, and even more damaged. WIC, along a target of Republican lawmakers, give states grants to provide nutrition aid and other assistance to pregnant and postpartum adults and children up to the age of 5. House Republican appropriators have proposed sharp cuts to WIC for the coming fiscal year, even as policy experts say a significant funding increase is needed as participation in the program grows. In a recent report, the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, the CBPP, warned up to 750,000 eligible toddlers, preschoolers, postpartum adults, and others eligible for WIC could be turned away from the program if the House GOP's proposed funding level becomes law. So that's happening right now. As usual, the Republicans are holding the Democrats, holding the budget hostage to get the Democrats to agree to cuts that would benefit the Democratic constituencies, which happen to be among the most vulnerable people. CBPP argued the program will need roughly $7.3 billion in total funding for fiscal year 2024. But the Republicans, who already secured more strict work requirements for SNAP recipients and a debt ceiling deal with the White House, want to approve just $5.5 billion for WIC. This is outrageous because the money doesn't mean anything. The federal government is a monetary sovereign. Of course, it can afford another $1.8 billion to make these people whole. Meanwhile, $120 billion is being sent to keep the war in Ukraine going. So Jesse Mermel tweets, letting people go hungry is inhumane and plain old bad public policy. Okay, it is. And especially in contrast to the much worse public policy of spending 120 billion to keep a losing war going, where hundreds of thousands of people are being unnecessarily killed. This is a bunch of crap. It is evil. Rahm emphasized Sunday that the request hinges on House Republicans, who recently have tried to slash WIC funding in a move that could spell cuts to poor Americans' monthly nutritional support. The White House estimates the GOP's proposed WIC cuts could reduce monthly fruit and vegetable benefits by 70% for pregnant women and 56% for children, while potentially forcing 1.9 million participants onto a wait list for aid. How can people who were going hungry in the first place be on a wait list for aid? They can't afford to be on a wait list because they're starving right now. The far-right House Freedom Caucus, which has dozens of members, has threatened to oppose any short-term funding agreement that does not impose steep cuts to federal spending. I notice they're not looking for steep cuts to federal spending on Ukraine. Oh, and put an end to the unprecedented weaponization of the Justice Department, an apparent reference to the prosecution of former President Donald Trump. The House Freedom Caucus are a bunch of fascists. That's the truth of the matter. The House, led by Republican Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican California, set to return from August recess next week. This was written by Jake Johnson on September 4th. That's this coming week. Next week is this coming week. The House, led by Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, is set to return from August recess next week. As CNN reported Sunday, GOP hardliners in the House are eager to play a game of chicken over the end of the month deadline to fund federal agencies, seeking to force the White House and Senate to make a choice, accept a slew of conservative priorities, or risk a debilitating government shutdown. Of course, the slew of conservative priorities would also be debilitating. Republican appropriators have called for major cuts to a range of federal programs related to education, environmental protection, and more, of course. Fascists are as fascists do. Representative Rosa DeLauro, the top Democrat on the House Appropriations Committee, wrote on social media over the weekend that House Democrats are ready to move on funding for disaster relief and other crises. House Republicans, she added, are listening to their most extreme members on steps that could slow the the flow of relief and put us to the brink of a government shutdown. So what has to be done to stop this? The Republicans have a majority, in the House. It's a small majority, but it's stopping, agreement and the passage of these 12 bills that have to pass, in order to fund everything. So, Kevin McCarthy is in a jam because if he opts to compromise with the Democrats to get some Democratic votes to put himself over the top, he's being threatened by the Freedom Caucus that they will try to pull a vacate the chair maneuver on him and get him defeated as the Speaker of the House. That can be stopped if Kevin McCarthy can make a deal with Democrats to defeat, the vacate the chair move. So, I think in this case, it's up to the Democrats to agree to continue support Kevin McCarthy, as the Speaker of the House, not just stand aside, and let, the vacate of the chair motion prevail. I think they should make a deal, with Kevin McCarthy to get this budget on the road, to stop the government shutdown, which would be highly damaging to people. Some sort of compromise needs to be made where the Freedom Caucus, is disempowered by the establishment. So that's what I think here tonight. This is, a Dump the Corruption program. I have to end, with the following message. We are being held hostage by the two-party system. We're always getting into these binds because the two parties are controlled by the donors. I'm not advocating for a third-party vote here for Congress, an explicit third-party vote. What I'm advocating for is that people who take big money be defeated across the country for Congress in 2024, whether they're Republicans, or whether they're Democrats. Yes, there will be the occasional race where there'll be a choice between two big money people. In that race, what you want to do is vote for the person who's raising the least amount, of big money. But if we all vote while keeping the rule, in mind, and I'm going to show you the rule once more. If we keep the rule in mind and we all vote, according to this rule, we will revolutionize the Congress, and we will revolutionize the vote for presidency also. Because the vote for president, in that case, will vote for the person who takes the least amount, of big money. That is unlikely to be either a Republican or a Democrat. It's more likely to be a third-party candidate. Which third-party candidate? I don't know, at this point. An obvious possibility is Cornel West. But I don't know what his financing is like. I don't know whether he's taking any big money or how much. There may be other third-party candidates that are not taking big money. But I think a lot of third-party candidates are taking big money. I think the Libertarian candidate for president will probably be on the big money train. All this remains to be seen. For now, I'm going to consider your comments. There are only 4. Kay Ryan, after she says hi, says AIPAC sucks. Jeff Denton says hi, Kay, and Kay says hi, Jeff. And those are all the comments. Okay, so I'm going to say good night. Hope you like the stream. I will probably see you on Tuesday with my usual show, okay, on international politics. But I have some personal business I have to take care of, and I'll be doing my best to complete that personal business on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. So most likely I will be back on Tuesday, but this is business I must take care of. So if I don't have it done by Tuesday, okay, I will announce, of course, if there is a show, okay, or not. If there's not one, then I'll be back, okay, on Wednesday, most probably with an international relations show, okay, at that time. Thank you for coming. Hopefully, I will see you on Tuesday.